thank you for joining us. It has now been 10 years since Sir Paul Callaghan gave his keynote address at StrategyNZ, and I have to say I'm a little bit goosebumpy on that concept because he was phenomenal. Since then, StrategyNZ has given us, I suppose, the energy and ideas and thoughts around New Zealand's long-term future. And part of that has been running 8 youth workshops. And we've been very lucky to collaborate with the Governor-General and lots of great speakers. So why, obviously now, why we're doing this comes down to 3 key purposes. The first one is actually to commemorate Sir Paul's keynote address and all the speakers and the participants that joined us 10 years ago. The second one is to learn about new tools and actually revisit some old tools of how you bring about change. And the last one is actually to create some space for this conversation. And that's, of course, bringing this team together, which of course for me is phenomenal. And as I was just telling them, I can't wait to sit back and hear all these ideas and thoughts be shared. I'm very fortunate to have Tiwai Coulston to join us. He's actually going to be sort of working with me through the event and also asking panel questions. And I've asked Tiwai to give us the formal welcome. Thank you, Tiwai.
So the quote was, "Ki te kāhore he whakakitenga ka ngaro te iwi," which is, without foresight or vision, the people will be lost. And although Sir Paul Callaghan might not have said this directly, that ethos rings very, very truly to his final address that he gave, and something that we'll be watching at the end of this. So it's unfortunate that we all can't be together today, but with the caliber of the speakers we have and the ethos of the kaupapa, I have no doubt that we can recreate that energy we saw at StrategyNZ 10 years ago. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you. So the team we've got together. So the order of speakers is important. We start first with commemorating Sir Paul, and we're very lucky to have his daughter Catherine speak. A really funny thing actually just happened because I said, oh, I'm actually going to quote out of Paul Callaghan's last book that he did called Luminous Moments, which is forwarded by Catherine. And you can see the little yellow sticky here, and that indicates the quote I wanted to say, but she's actually going to say it. So I had already chosen it. So look forward to that space and hear that comment from her. Now, the second thing I said was about to learn new tools. And so we're extremely fortunate to have Rowan Conway with us. Rowan's in the dark in the UK, not literally actually, physically anyway. So Rowan's actually going to tell us about mission-oriented strategies, and I think she's got 30 slides, so she's going to be pumping and we're all going to be watching that happen. But I had the pleasure of talking with Rowan last night, and a phenomenal Q&A that I've already had with her, so I'm hoping you guys will follow up with some great questions later. Then the next group, I've actually nicknamed you the originals, the 4 originals of StrategyNZ speakers. So that's Dennis, Aaron, Sam and Alex. Dennis is from the US, the chief scientist at Langley and NASA. Aaron Maniam, who of course is from Singapore and is well known to many New Zealanders, and actually interesting, known to Rowan as well. Now they're both on recording mode for personal reasons, obviously other parts of the world. Then we have Sam and Alex, which I argue is 2 of the 100 entrepreneurs that that Sir Paul mentions in his presentation. So I'm very interested to see what Sam and Alex have got to say, obviously for that reason. So if you can imagine an economy, he saw those 100 entrepreneurs as the engine room that would drive it. We need to find them, we need to look after them, we need to listen to them. So enormously great pleasure to have you guys on board. Then we've got Sacha and Jamie, and they're going to talk about old tools, maybe used new ways. And Sacha, of course, I had pleasure with being with on What Next with. She's going to join us in the panel. She's actually lecturing at the moment. which will be fantastic. But she's got a pre-recording that she's done with us, which is phenomenal as well. And then we've got Jamie, who's going to, he's going to basically listen to everything everyone says and sort of bring it together and interpret it for us. So Jamie, putting the pressure back to you. Super looking forward to that. And then we've got what I call the two change makers, which are Donna and Vic. You're both in very significant organisations. You can bring about enormous change. And I think the opportunity to bring this to you, for you to digest it and possibly take it forward, would be fantastic. And I know Donna knows Rowan, and so I'm looking forward to perhaps some interesting dialogue and questions coming from you guys. I wanted to, and I'm just looking at my timing, already slightly over, but I just wanted to close with Mariana Mazzucato's her latest book, and it's just a quote she's got right at the very end. One of the things that, when I started this, it was thinking about a commemoration to Sir Paul, but actually what I've realised is that we're very much at risk of just returning back to normal in New Zealand, and the rest of the world has actually had a lot of pressures on it. And so we're really at risk as going back to the status quo while the rest of the world pushes on. And that really concerns me, and is actually, so that's why this little comment that's actually at the back of Mariana's book, which she wrote in COVID. And she actually says, she goes to Aotearoa's, she wrote during the pandemic in 2020. She says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is of no difference. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our data banks, our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with light luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So Mariana closes by saying, I hope this book has given us some of the tools to imagine that world and to fight the battles. And I look to the panel to actually give us the tools to fight the battle going forward. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pass you straight over to Catherine. Thank you.
Kia ora, Wendy, and kia ora tātou. It was 10 years ago today that my father, Paul Callaghan, laid out his vision for New Zealand's future as a country with a sustainable, knowledge-based economy. He saw that New Zealand's future prosperity could be secured with just 100 more technology companies producing $40 billion a year in exports. But he also saw that it was important to make New Zealand a country where talent wants to live. He understood that to attract and retain the best of the world's talent, it's vital to ensure that creative, talented people want to live in New Zealand, and therefore that any credible business plan for New Zealand had to be based on developing sustainable economic growth, protecting its beautiful environment, ensuring social justice and tackling inequality, and designing livable communities and good infrastructure to give people a truly good quality of life. He laid down a challenge for New Zealanders and New Zealand leaders to think about themselves and their place in the world differently to how they had before. And in doing so, he tackled some of the myths that New Zealanders like to tell about themselves and their society. This idea that New Zealand is an egalitarian society where everyone is equal, that it's clean and green, that we don't need prosperity to have a good life, and that it would be possible to increase New Zealand's prosperity by increasing tourism or just exploiting its natural resources. Well, no doubt he broke a few taboos in that speech, but I'd like to hope and believe that some of the ideas he imparted may have taken seed and started to grow. But why did he do this? What was this crazy physicist doing, telling New Zealand how it should be thinking about itself and its economic future? Well, on one level, my father was always someone who enjoyed challenging conventional wisdom, of applying his scientific and inquiring mind to the world around him, even if it was outside of his field of expertise. He was also a born communicator who loved sharing his ideas with other people. But more fundamentally, my father was a passionate New Zealander who cared about New Zealand's future and who cared about what was going to happen to the country long after he had gone. As he put it, it was all about the world we're trying to create for our mokopuna. I think there was also a personal dimension for him. When he delivered that address 10 years ago, he knew he didn't have long to live. In fact, he died of the metastatic cancer that he talked about in that speech almost exactly a year later. I think he felt a sense of urgency to communicate his vision for New Zealand's future while he still could. He told us he had to live each day as though it were his last, which for him meant the life fulfilled, with opportunities accepted, risks encountered boldly, and not a moment wasted. I think he also had a personal reason for wanting to make New Zealand a place where talent wants to live. He had to watch both of his children leave New Zealand as young adults and build their lives and their careers outside of New Zealand in the UK. I went on to become a barrister, and my brother Chris became a transplant surgeon for the NHS. What that meant was that my father didn't get to watch his grandchildren grow up. And I think that my father hoped that if New Zealand could become a place where talent wants to live, then talented kids from New Zealand would come home after their OE, and no more Kiwi grandparents would have to watch their grandchildren grow up on a computer screen rather than in person. And surely ultimately, that's what any mission statement or business plan for Aotearoa New Zealand should be based on. I'd like to thank Wendy McGuinness, the McGuinness Institute and Callaghan Innovation for inviting me to speak here today. By continuing to talk about my father and his ideas, we help to keep his memory alive and enable him to keep talking to us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine. What a special man and a special daughter. Rowan, if you could now share these 30 slides, we're all riveting to hear about this new mission-orientated strategy. So I'm just going to pass you straight over. Thanks.
Thank you, Morena, everyone. Hello from yesterday and the darkness that is here in England. Catherine and I are both here. That was very moving, and thank you for that introduction, Catherine. I very much appreciate it. And thank you to Wendy and the McGuinness Institute for inviting me to join this auspicious and wonderful event. So I have this rather grand title of Mission Aotearoa, and I don't feel that I can own that. And certainly it's important to be mindful that when I speak of a mission in this way, I am in no way exporting a template or a framework that should be adopted as rote or copied and pasted. My role here is really to share some thoughts with you from the institute that I am based at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, from myself and my colleague Mariana Mazzucato, who Wendy just moments ago quoted from. So I'm going to offer some ideas, some insights, some thoughts about what mission-oriented innovation is, and I'm going to just base it on some of the context that Mariana Mazzucato has put out in her three quite purposeful books that she's published since 2013. Those are The Entrepreneurial State, The Value of Everything, which looks at value theory, and then, as Wendy alluded to, The Mission Economy, which she wrote during lockdown. These were all based on her work, her long-running work that looks into the concepts of public purpose-driven innovation. And her work very much is driven towards changing how innovation is imagined, practiced, and evaluated in order for it to be directed towards societal challenges and missions, if you like. So at the Institute, my role is as head of the Mission Oriented Innovation Network, which is a global network of 98 at the moment public agencies, and this is where I met Donna, that are thinking about mission orientation in terms of innovation. And we work with public agencies, which might be departments or government departments or cities or funding agencies and innovation agencies, to bring about revived notions of public value. So not just cost benefit analysis or the value as price, but actually value that puts public purpose to the center of political economy and changes policy practice, working with the concept that growth should have a direction as well as a rate. So it's not just about fast moving innovation, but actually about trying to do something with that innovation. We also look at how government actors around the world can act as value creators. And it's very important to recognize that value today is recognized and dictated largely by market ideals of efficiency and cost reduction. So we want to expand that, and a lot of our work is about broadening the concept of public value. And through our Masters in Public Administration, we equip leaders of the future to be able to co-design innovation-led and sustainable inclusive growth. So thank you for having me after a decade after Sir Paul Callaghan did such a momentous speech at that Strategy and Foresight for New Zealand. I was very taken by the presentation, and I really was gripped by some of the things that Catherine has just alluded to, some of the debunking the myths that were really profoundly kind of ingrained within the way that people thought about innovation, specifically in New Zealand. But also he brought the concept of long-termism, and it's really interesting, this concept of a decade on, these words still resonate. And his words were at the beginning of his paper, long-term vision is something we tend to avoid in New Zealand, with the possible exception of Māori, who have been greater reason to focus on the development of their assets for future generations. But I will argue here that the vision is essential to any strategy aimed at enhancing prosperity. So that's where we're going to go with this presentation. These are a series of questions. I'm not providing a series of answers. What I'm really doing is saying, what if? What if there was a mission-oriented innovation approach to New Zealand and its approach to innovation? So I'm going to try and address 5 key challenges effectively that Wendy gave me. The first one is, what is a mission-oriented innovation approach, and how is it different from, say, the grand challenges in the Sustainable Development Goals, or indeed just business as usual strategy and policy? Why do we need this, and why do we need it now? Who's doing it, and how are countries using this approach? What's working there and what's not working, and what next for Aotearoa New Zealand? Mariana started in mission economy thinking about moonshots, suggesting that missions have been used to inspire and direct action throughout history. She says a generation of missions in the 1960s were technological, such as NASA's Apollo mission. The Kennedy moonshot is the one that put the man on the moon. But today's societal challenges are perhaps more prosaic and considerably more wicked than the space race. And when we talk about wicked problems, I mean, we're living in the middle of a wicked problem with the pandemic. They require considerably more attention in a way that the social interactions interact with the political and technological issues. The complexity of challenges like climate change make them far less clear-cut than a mission to space. So how do we start breaking down what missions are in practice, and how do they differ from these political agenda of the grand challenges? Well, Mariana first put together an approach for mission-oriented innovation when she worked with Carlos Moedas in the European Union, setting about thinking how to do a problem-solving approach to innovation-led growth. And this also plays back to Sir Paul Callaghan's focus on prosperity, because there's very much a connection between driving innovation-led growth as opposed to more extractive or consumer-led growth, so that you're focusing on a clear targeted mission, which is targeted at solving a societal problem or a grand challenge. But you're also thinking that this is going to enable cross-sectoral innovation. So you're not taking the traditional approach of sort of sectoral innovation investment. Rather, what you're suggesting is that this mission should set out a series of challenges or micro challenges that sectors will have to collaborate on. And through that, a portfolio of projects and bottom-up experimentation emerges. Now, Mariana very much focuses on the idea that these must be concrete. So the difference between the Grand Challenge, which is a series of political mandates or big issues that need approaching, the 5 criteria for missions is really that they must be bold and inspirational. So they need that kind of clearly catalytic mandate, but they have to be clear. They have to have be measurable and time bound, and be realistic with research and innovation actions. They can't be hyperbolic or too abstract. They on purpose need to be cross-disciplinary, cross-sectoral, and recognize that they're going to join up actors across the system. And the idea would be to drive multiple bottom-up solutions. Along the way with the European Union, as they set their missions, this drove a requirement to say, well, how do you do this? So the second publication that she worked on with the EU was that working on governing missions in the European Union, which talks about mission selection. It talks about the portfolio approach to manage missions, and it talks about what it takes to actually direct public finance in order to crowd in private investment. And it rethinks public sector organisations away from an efficiency logic to one that thinks about dynamic public value creation. And a phrase that we use a lot at the Institute, and we have it in fact plastered across our walls, is that innovation is political. It's very important that this isn't seen as a panacea, because actually applying mission-oriented thinking, and this is from the mission economy, applying mission-oriented thinking in our times requires not just adaptation, but also institutional innovations that create markets and reshape existing ones. And that importantly also requires citizen participation. This raises 2 issues that are key for a mission and the vision behind it. The first is, whose vision should determine this, i.e. who decides, which is one of the reasons why I wouldn't tell you at all what to do in New Zealand. It must be something that is driven from New Zealand. The second is that it might be easier to rouse approval for the purely technological missions as opposed to those that are more social, like fighting climate change, which no doubt will face more resistance. And she goes on to talk about political resistance. I think it's an interesting, I once spoke with Tom Khalil, who was he set up the BRAIN project and nanotechnology project for the Obama administration, but had found that he was able to get funding continuously across different political innovations because nanotechnology was not seen as political, whereas something like health or climate change would be, which I thought was hilarious and terribly tragic all at the same time, probably because no one really understands what nanotechnology is. And so therefore the legitimacy to call it out or bring it as a political issue is much less, the mandate is much less there, whereas there is a kind of climate skeptic side and there is a climate, and so it becomes quite partisan. So why do we need mission-oriented innovation? Well, I've taken this actually from the Danish new Green and Sustainable World strategy, and I think it explains the issue and why we do need a kind of meso system, a system that's below the macro of the Sustainable Development Goals, but above the micro of the startups who will save us. And it's the recognition that you need to convert the conversation, quoting Elvis Presley here, a little less conversation, a little more action. The climate challenge is one of the greatest global challenges of our time. We now know that. We've known this very clearly since the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were set in 2015. Global consensus technically has been reached on the need for the change of course to avoid a major rise in global temperatures and the irreparable damage such as that increase would cause. But efforts to translate these goals into actions have been insufficient. Governments around the world are now recognizing that. Drawing on Mariana's work again, the point of missions is that they create momentum. Effectively, they set in train things that then become not an unstoppable force, but a force to be reckoned with towards creating the direction of travel for innovation. So missions by definition set out an explicit direction towards a goal that will need political and local buy-in if they are to succeed. And yet missions also provide a highly visible and explicit invitation to innovate, without which a challenge such as climate change might otherwise seem too large and existential to tackle. While there are many calls to action by civil society, we've seen the climate marches led by figures like Greta Thunberg. Without a policy framework that provides a clear license for exploration, innovative solutions to global challenges will not arise spontaneously with our existing tools. I think it's really important. We have to be testing and experimenting with new tools because our existing toolkit isn't quite fit for purpose. If it was, we would have solved the problems already. So how? How are countries and institutions deploying missions? Well, in the EU has set about the Horizon 2020 framework until 2027 and has set aside multiple billions of research and innovation funding, specifically around 5 key areas. Now, these are then divested to the EU member states, and they are trying to translate the SDGs into concrete actions, specifically around adaptation to climate change, including societal transformation. So that's focusing on cities, for, new approaches to prevention for cancer, healthy ocean, seas, coastal and inland waters, climate neutral and smart cities. Sorry, the adaptation was not the same as the smart cities, and soil health and food. We've seen that these missions have also gained traction across the world, and we work very closely with the OECD in their OPSI, the Office for Public Service Innovation, Observatory for Public Service Innovation. And we've seen that actually many of these missions have gained traction across the whole world in different forms. So this is CSIRO, who is working as the innovation agency in Australia, and very much their focus has been to lead science, technology and innovation missions that are very, very targeted towards building rural resilience that reduces drought impacts, looking particularly at the issues, how to drive innovation so that they can deal with in-country local adaptation to climate change. And how you think and conceive of climate change is also really important. So to go from the abstract or the SDG on climate action into what does that mean in our country is something that takes deep work and also political and citizen buy-in. In Denmark, and we're working quite closely with the Danish Design Centre as well as the Danish Ministry for Climate Change and the Danish Innovation Fund, they have set extremely bold plans for both divesting away from oil and fossil fuels by 2050, which is quite a bold statement, and also moving their carbon reduction and decarbonising more rapidly than any other nation. Effectively, Denmark sees its role as driving one of their key goals is to increase global climate ambition. So by being the first mover, if you like, there is this opportunity to show the world the way it's done. I think I would put it out there that New Zealand has this opportunity too, with its reputation globally for having that political mandate and embracing it. In terms of then how they're converting that into action, they've committed to phasing out oil and gas production by 2050. The government has set out specific green research and innovation missions and are contributing to the green transition. That's a lot of money. I can't even work out what that figure is of Danish kroner, for research and innovation partnerships to meet the mission. They are taking a big science approach in many of these instances as well. So they are investing heavily in carbon capture and storage, which does require an advanced R&D infrastructure, large-scale public and private finance, and a mature innovation ecosystem. This is one of the reasons why you would never just copy and paste the one nation over to another nation, because not everyone will have the same capacity, if you like, to deliver on these kinds of things. So this is why I also wanted to give you a different approach, which the UNDP accelerator labs around the world are starting to look at missions from the ground up and using portfolio experimentation. In this case, this is the case of Pakistan, where they're looking at community-driven experimentation to address global challenges. And that means running multiple experiments at the same time with the goal of learning from them at a systems level. And this is something that actually is a very structured way of community participation, but still has a kind of feedback loop directly into the SDG. So the mission sits in the middle, but the activity is all driven on the ground. So what's working and what's not? It would be unfair to say that missions are a panacea, and I would never say such a thing. And in fact, they come in many different forms, and the forms need to fit the nature of the organization, of the institutions, or of the political economy in which they're sitting. So when we think about the work that we're doing in the US, Biden is now driving a big challenge back towards industrial and innovation strategy and policy. This becomes very much a top-down approach to better align policy mixes but it also means that it's a very clear signal of government commitment. It allocates funding simply, it coordinates departments around missions, not sectors. It is subject to political cycles, so it has to be very mindful of how quickly it can operate, but effectively it's a very good way of, if you like, command and control or waterfall, enabling things to happen in this kind of top-down coordination. At another level, you see these institutionally led missions, which are possibly more, if you think about when I talked about the BRAIN project, they work across multiple political cycles because they are sat within purpose-driven STI institutions. So that might be the DARPAs of this world or the NASAs of this world, or indeed in Australia, CSIRO. This is where they, I've now run out of time, but I'm going to be very fast. They invest across the whole innovation chain. Then I won't go into all of these because I will share these slides, but effectively, this missions require a systemic opportunity, recognizing that they are, as I say, setting a course and then letting innovation take its course. So it requires us to think differently about how we fund and invest capital in innovation. So we're not just looking for a few big bets on unicorn startups, but actually that we are setting a mission and then hoping with that narrative for big change, we are catalyzing a wider room of new markets which have multiple outcomes and many system components. Innovation doesn't always have to be in a startup. Sometimes innovation can be in an institutional improvement. And I will lastly talk about what's not working. It's very important to be aware of mission mimicry. Hence why I'm saying continuously, I'm not selling you a product in which I would like you to adopt. You know, the missions are difficult. They require that you build bespoke tools, capabilities, and a long-term view within the context of the nation or organization that they're working in. So it's important to recognize that there aren't really best practice examples for missions. And missions will require that you start working getting between the rhetoric and reality gap. So setting this direction for a solution, the right answers aren't known in advance. So there will be an implementation gap that will need to be navigated through experimentation. And we talk about portfolios that need to be put in place. So I won't tell you about you, other than to say there is a bold political mandate in New Zealand towards a climate action, that you know what needs to be done. You have the Climate Change Commission and it has all the data that's there that says this is what has to happen. You have got capital, capacity, innovation capability and confidence. Maybe some of that needs to be built or reshaped, but effectively it will need mindsets and frameworks to shift. And importantly, I'm going to go back one. Importantly, you have the treaty that is a foundational agreement, which helps you start thinking about how you do this in partnership. So the questions that I'm leaving with are, how might you best design, build and realize missions? What might be the best governance framework for leading, tracking and assessing the results of these missions? And what is a just, inclusive and sustainable transition? And it's important to recognize a just transition does not mean simple or easy. This will be hard work. But a decade from now, as we are a decade from then, you know, a mission will require bold innovation. And we know we've only got a decade for the SDGs to be realized. So they may be the mandate for countries to direct such innovation and missions can provide the pathway to deliver on that mandate, but the rest is up to you. Thank you so much.
Rowan, that's phenomenal. I want you to just go back, if you didn't mind, to that slide where you just had.
Sorry, yeah.
I think that's definitely, I'd asked you specifically to talk about. I call it the phones with the balls.
Yeah.
But,
this one, yeah.
Yeah, this one. I just think that's a phenomenal image of perhaps the way of the past and the way of the future for New Zealand. And I just really wanted to thank you. I thought it was a really clear, crisp presentation. And for someone who has been looking at lots of videos and reading papers and things like this, your presentation was excellent. And now we're going to pass over to the chief scientist from NASA. So we've got a recording. So he's had the experience of actually being involved in a mission, and I've asked him just to have a little look at what he thinks from New Zealand 10 years on from StrategyNZ. So here we go.
New Zealand has a superb place to live. You have clean air, superb landscape, excellent climate, wonderful food, good health care. It's a safe society and a friendly population. I have checked with friends all over the world in the preparation for this, and they all agree they want to move there. And this is what you advertise for your sizable tourist industry. So I'm going to suggest another place where you can capitalize on all of this good living. So there's digital reality and tele-everything. We have come out of the industrial age several decades now, and society is shifting increasingly to tele-everything. We now telecommute, telework, teletravel, teleshop, telemedicine, teleeducation, telecommerce, telesocialization, telepolitics, and so forth. And during COVID, we were forced over this last year to shift almost totally to this digital reality, tele-everything. And the projections that people are finding for post-COVID life are that about 40 or 50% of the people that shifted aren't going back to physical travel and physical work sites. So we now create wealth by inventing things. Previously in the industrial age, we created wealth by being extractive and exploiting natural resources. We fought 2 world wars over natural resources. Today, we create wealth by inventing things. A perusal of the current New Zealand economy indicates that the economy is still largely industrial age with respect to being extraction related. You extract and create an economy out of agriculture, aquaculture, seafood, animals, mining, natural gas, forestry, and wine, all of which are extracted. So what I'm going to now give you is a new industry which will propel you forward beyond the IT age into the virtual age. So the suggested new industry: become the preferred place to live, operate from for folks that ideate, invent, and create the future. Become a worldwide Silicon Valley. Some of you may remember what Silicon Valley, which is the little peninsula leading up to San Francisco, what that was like in the 50s and 60s when it started there. And it was a superb place to live, very, very similar to New Zealand is now. It's got a little more populated now and a lot more expensive. There's approximately 50,000 low Earth orbit satellites that SpaceX and other people are putting up, which will provide superb connectivity, very high-speed internet everywhere in the world, including New Zealand, to enable the death of distance totally. So people that invent the future, that create the wealth by inventing things, can live, interact, and operate from anywhere in the world now. So their decision comes down to what's a wonderful place to live and raise a family, and that worldwide is New Zealand. So the idea for your industry is that New Zealand imports these superb inventive talent people and exports ideas and inventions. And some of the changes to your economy in this process include serious real estate value increases. I don't know if you understand what the real estate is in Silicon Valley, but it's interesting. And new needs will arise for very high quality services for these folks. Your intellectual atmosphere will improve, especially your universities and so forth. And your manufacturing activities can perhaps work with these folks to provide initial DEMVAL and maybe even manufacturing for these new industries and new ideas, new inventions. So this is a way to propel you forward out of the industrial age, out of extractive industry into the virtual age, bypassing completely the IT age. Thank you very much for listening.
This is a very insightful character. I've been in the US and people just are in complete awe of him. So it was lovely to get his insights there. Now, the next person is Aaron Mannon, who is obviously in Singapore. He's got a recording as well. He's very connected to New Zealand. A lot of New Zealanders know him, and we're very pleased and delighted he was going to share his words of wisdom. So here we go, Aaron.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much to the McGuinness Institute and the whole team there for the invitation to share some thoughts with you today. I wanted to share one thought on how things have stayed the same over the past 10 years, and two thoughts on how things have become a little bit different, or perhaps a lot different from where we were before. In my last sharing, I spoke a lot about how Singapore has adopted scenario planning as well as other futures thinking methodologies and tools to help us plan for the future and prepare for the future in a systematic and structured way. The need for that has not reduced. If anything, it's been intensified. And one of the reasons it's been intensified is the fact that the geopolitical environment has stayed as complex, as uncertain, and as ambiguous as it has ever been. This is, I think, the thing that has stayed the same, at least in my mind. We deal with a geopolitical system that is multi-actor, that is polyarchic, to use the technical term. And I think that kind of complexity is only increasing today. We see more players, we see intensified both collaboration and competition amongst different players. We see some of those collaborations and competitions existing in new dimensions like technology. And this, I think, has only intensified the kind of geopolitical nuance and complexity that exists and that we all have to grapple with if we are interested in planning for the future. So that is what I think stayed the same. Let me talk a little bit about the two things that I think are now different. The first is that I think we live in a world where resources, at least some resources, are far more generative today than they have been before. Economics teaches us that one of the great problems we face is the problem of scarcity. But I think new technologies, especially centered around data, have allowed us to create new abundances, new generative resources, where the more we use them, the more we have of them, rather than the more scarce they become. Knowledge, data, insight, and wisdom are all like this. And I think if we're able to harness the huge potential that exists in these generative resources, in the use of data to create and catalyze more wisdom in the world, what we will see is huge new horizons and new opportunities being created. But at the same time, what we also see is new inequalities coming about. And that, I think, is the second thing that has changed in the world as far as I can see it. New inequalities apply because the access to these technologies that exist is not always evenly distributed. What we see is the both accessibility and ability to use the new technologies, right? The skills, the wherewithal, the resources, both intellectual and financial, don't exist in equal ways amongst different communities. And this, I think, produces really interesting, but also potentially very pernicious inequalities within societies as well as between countries. The implications for all of this is really the fact that we need to see ourselves as operating much more in a moral ecosystem than ever before. We're in an ecosystem because we're all fundamentally interconnected and interdependent. We are our brothers and sisters keepers in a lot of ways. And we're in a moral ecosystem because the things that link us are not just technical connections. They're not just the connections that are impersonal because we happen to interact amongst different ideas or because the needs and wants that we have interconnect. What I think is happening is that we are morally culpable for each other in ways that were not always obvious 10 years ago. We are each other's keepers in the sense that the things that we do have moral consequences for those around us. And the more we realize that, and the more we harness that moral ecosystem in a system that is also generative in its resources, the more I think we'll be able to make sure that the future is one where all of us can participate actively, where all of us have a part, and where all of us can find meaningful ways to lead flourishing lives. I wanted to thank the team again from the McGuinness Institute for putting this event together, for allowing all of us to reflect a little bit on what happened 10 years ago and how the world has both stayed the same as well as changed in very important ways since then. Take care and a wonderful future to all of you.
Aaron, it's an amazing guy. Right, now to two more amazing guys, Sam followed by Alex. So Sam, I'm hoping you're out there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, from all the big thinkers down to sort of me. So good morning, everybody. So I thought I'd just reflect on sort of two areas that I sort of spend quite a lot of time on and how they have changed in the last 10 years. So firstly on technology. So 10 years ago when we were listening to Paul's talk, 27% of us in New Zealand had smartphones with a data plan. So a third of us, under a third. The top selling phone brand was Nokia. The iPhone 4 came out that year. The iPad came out that year. We all lived under these measly data caps, both at home and on our mobiles. It was less of a problem than it is today because there was no Netflix or any of these things that our teenagers were blowing through data plans quite as badly as they are today. In 2011, Tesla had shipped their 100th car. Last year they did 500,000 cars. Uber launched that year in San Francisco. We saw it in New Zealand a few years later. Netflix was still shipping DVDs and had not produced any original content at that point. And Xero, where I was on the board, had just done their annual report and we had 9.3 million of revenue for the year. And that is now closing in on 100 times larger. So they're closing in on $1 billion of revenue. So more broadly, since 2011, the number of transistors on a CPU and on a computer chip has increased 7-fold. The cost of generating solar power has gotten 80% cheaper since just 2011. Batteries for cars have gotten 90% cheaper and quite a lot more dense. We've got drones and virtual reality headsets. I've actually got them here in my office, which certainly didn't have 10 years ago. We hadn't heard of things like CRISPR or Bitcoin, blockchain, machine learning, really, RNA vaccines, all of this stuff. The top 5 companies in the world were Walmart and 4 oil companies, Shell, BP, Chevron, Sinopec in China. Today, those largest companies are all companies you have and use on your phone, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook. So in 2020, the future sort of seemed to arrive for many of us all at once. I remember when Paul was giving his talk, he was to be followed by someone talking at NASA on video conference, which was sponsored by Telecom or something, and a really big deal that we could get someone to blast in from the United States. We totally take that for granted now, that is just a commodity service. In 2020, we all worked out how to, Zoom and unmute ourselves and to chew gum and to, walk down the street doing all of this on our phones with our wireless earbuds and all at the same time, to, calls with 15 people and, a whole bunch of different continents. So, technology has changed massively actually in that time. And it's not just, they say that the technology or the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. I think last year it became much more evenly distributed in terms of all of these things, kind of coming into our everyday lives. So in addition to technology, the other thing that has changed massively is money. So in 2007, a 1-year mortgage rate was 10%. When Paul gave his talk, a 1-year mortgage rate was 6.5%. I just looked it up last night. A mortgage rate now is just over 2%. In New Zealand. If you put your money in the bank, you basically get 0%. And we're living in an era of government money printing and seemingly permanent low interest rates. And that has massive implications for both savers and borrowers. So savers basically get 0% now. So everyone's KiwiSaver looking at their historic returns are certainly no indication of future returns. They're going to be a lot less returns, from high asset prices and low interest rates. Everyone is going to get a lot less return on their capital. People have to take a lot more risk. So this is a major problem for retirees all around the world. And the other side of that is that the borrowing has gotten extremely cheap. And so New Zealanders are continuing to excel at what our core competency is, which is borrowing money and buying and selling houses back and forth to one another at ever increasing prices. And Auckland house prices in New Zealand here are now more expensive as a multiple of incomes than London or San Francisco. But it's not just house prices that are going up. So with low interest rates, everyone's looking for a return, and tech companies have been able to raise insane amounts of money. So Google raised 25 million of venture capital. Uber, by contrast, raised 25 billion of venture capital before going public, 1,000 times more than Google raised. Microsoft, interestingly, raised 1 million of venture capital when they were doing their business. I routinely see now companies raising 10, 20, 30 million dollars that have, you know, not a lot of revenue going for them at that point. So there's a huge amount of money looking for a return. All the pension funds in the world are going into venture and all those sorts of things. And those that own assets are obviously doing extremely well. Those that are innovating and creating companies are doing really well. But those without assets are falling further and further behind because incomes are certainly not keeping pace. So inequality is something that just gets worse and worse and worse in a world of, you know, cheap money and then, you know, technology. You know, I sort of, like my desk here, I've got iPads and iPhones and all this sort of stuff. This is not necessarily technology that is spread evenly amongst society. So I just wanted to kind of loop back to a couple of the themes in Paul's 2011 talk, which was, firstly, he talked a lot about us building a future on tourism, and particularly low productivity tourism wages being a particularly dumb thing to do. He appears to have been kind of proven suddenly right about that in the last year. Paul was talking about New Zealand being a place where talent wants to live, and that has suddenly become much more obvious, I think, to all of us, not just because we can't leave, but you know, obviously there are people that want to move here, realize they can do all of the telecommuting and so forth that previous speakers have talked about. I was actually recently involved in a sale of a New Zealand technology company to a US company, and I didn't leave my home office and they didn't visit the company. We did the whole thing over Zoom and email. You know, high value company that sold. It's kind of the whole thing: hiring, firing, buying companies, selling companies, shutting companies down, all that sort of stuff you can do from your desk, which is quite a surprise to most of us. And then lastly, Paul suggested that we needed to get good at building businesses that do weird stuff. And this has gotten both easier and harder. The new technology has created massive opportunities, and obviously the you know, tidal wave of money which is bouncing around the world has made it much easier to get funded in many ways. But those waves are hitting the entire world. They're hitting 1.4 billion people in India. They're hitting 1.4 billion people in China. They're hitting, you know, all these other places that are also building what are increasingly globalized businesses. So you start a business in your bedroom, like Zoom, and suddenly you're the global de facto for that. And they win, and they get all the revenue. They build a massive company, and that wealth obviously goes to the, you know, the 2 or 3 people that were building that business. It's very, very concentrated in terms of how that wealth kind of accumulates and agglomerates. So there's just massive amounts of talent being unleashed, massive amounts of capital being unleashed. But building businesses is as tough as ever. You know, we need to work in smaller and smaller niches in a world of larger and larger monopolies. These big companies that, you know, I saw something yesterday about Volkswagen looking for 10,000 software engineers. You know, so the scale of these businesses sucking up talent is significant. And, you know, keeping those businesses here for the long term is very difficult in that context. Anyway, that's my 5 minutes, technology and money. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to what's next.
Sam, always amazing to hear you. Thank you very much. Really interesting insights there. Right, Alex.
Greetings all. I vividly remember Sir Paul Callaghan's talk from 10 years ago. I remember him saying New Zealand is good at weird stuff. I also remember him scoffing at the logic that says we're good at agriculture, so we should be good at biotech. And then he showed that that was also completely at odds with the evidence. He said that all we need is 100 inspired entrepreneurs, but for the companies they build to stay in New Zealand, we must be a place that talent wants to live. And I remember him mentioning a number of things on that front, but with a particular focus on the environment. This was compelling, but also very confronting for me, because you see, I'd sat in a number of highbrow strategy conversations where someone had made the biotech argument and we'd all nodded our heads. Now, over the last 10 years, I've spent my career at the front line of building Kiwi companies competing on the global stage. Companies Orion Health, Les Mills International, Vend and SIFT, now SIFT Technologies. And in many ways had the opportunity to live the experience that Sir Paul spoke about. So I want to share some reflections from that experience. I have 6 points and only a few minutes, so buckle in, it's going to be rapid. Number one, do weird stuff. Sir Paul was right. I've searched a few times for executive opportunities at Kiwi companies taking on the world, and I've ended up working in health software, fitness classes, retail point of sale, and mass spectrometry. And if we look at the top Kiwi entrepreneurial successes of the decade, we see accounting software, rockets, church payments, respiratory care products. I'll give you A2 milk as related to dairy. Point number two, weird stuff takes weird people. Sir Paul hinted at this. I understand this a lot better after working with 4 founders of growth companies, one of which was Sam, by the way. The reason we're good at weird stuff is because entrepreneurial success is by definition exceptional. That takes exceptional people who are usually a bit obsessive about a particular problem or opportunity, and they rarely factor in the government's view on the most attractive markets. Point number 3, but it takes a village. I have to humbly disagree with Sir Paul here. He said that building a great country takes 100 inspired entrepreneurs. And from experience, it takes a lot more than just a great entrepreneur or CEO to build a great company. When I first became CEO of Vend, I thought I was the captain of the team. It turns out that I was mostly the head coach. I didn't get to take the field very often. All action happens through the people who I brought onto the team. And yeah, so it takes a village. There's a problem here, which is reflection number 4, and that is that we have massive talent gaps in this country and we're not doing enough to fill them. I always highlight product management and marketing as areas where we have a shallow pool of talent. Doesn't mean that the people who are doing that in New Zealand aren't any good. It just means there aren't that many of them. And particularly for global companies. So take marketing as an example. Many of our companies operate only in our domestic market, which is small and not very competitive. And this is a terrible training ground to learn clear positioning and the knife fighting skills of online marketing that you need in global markets. We need more leaders in these areas as multipliers for our entrepreneurs and mentors for our up and coming talent. Now, New Zealand is having a moment right now. I think we all know this. We're the hot place to be. And from what I can see, we're largely sitting here passively as the opportunity passes us by, with the notable exception of things like the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, which is really bringing in some great people. Point number 5, it's about much more than the environment. And Sir Paul did touch on this. Look, the environment is super important for who we are as New Zealanders and people who might want to come here. But the major pull to New Zealand right now is the perception that we have a well-functioning government. Unfortunately, there are also a number of push factors that have been directly cited to me by executives as reasons that they will not move here. Things like the price of houses, of course, we talk about that a lot, but also food, petrol, and yes, even discussions about bulk buying toilet paper at Costco and, where do you do that in New Zealand? People from San Francisco and London are shocked at the cost of groceries in New Zealand. Just let that sink in for a second. And the creative people that Dennis Bushnell mentioned care about this stuff. You can see right now in sort of tech Twitter land that San Francisco is viewed as not safe with massive social problems like homelessness. And so lots of tech people are moving to Miami. And I think that should be a lesson to us in New Zealand. And Point number 6, the next generation of entrepreneurs fill me with both hope and fear. So millennials get a hard time, but my experience is that they're creative and ambitious. They live with purpose and a much deeper sense of who they are as New Zealanders than my generation did. But they're being pushed away by the same factors that push away senior executives. I remember this was brought home to me once having lunch with one of our talented young leaders at Bend. He was newly married and him and his wife were both comfortably making 6-figure salaries. So many people, and most people I think in New Zealand would consider them to be relatively privileged, but they did not believe that they would ever be able to afford a house in Auckland and were reconsidering their family plans on that basis. So when we talk about house prices in this country, it's about much more than economics. It's actually about hope. Now, the good news is that the same set of factors that attract complementary overseas talent will keep our kids and grandchildren here. So we can kind of address both of those problems at once. So look, there's my 6 rapid fire frontline reflections. After 10 years of doing this stuff, for me, Sir Paul's vision of a place that talent wants to live rings even more true. And I now better appreciate its genius in the sense that it's broad enough that it captures the many things that we want to achieve, but it's also clear enough that it gives us focus on where we want to set our policies and our actions. And, you know, I look at what COVID has done, and for us, it has gifted us with the opportunity to reset, to rediscover the taonga of Aotearoa and to relaunch ourselves into the world. So let's be bold and commit to that mission. Thank you all.
Love it. Okay, so that's the 4 originals. Alex, it was fantastic. So we're going to move from the 4 originals to Sacha and Jamie. So Sacha's actually got a recording. She's going to join us in the panel shortly. So I'm going to, without further ado, pass over to Sacha in the recording. Thank you, guys.
Ngā mihi, mata koe ki ngā maunga whakahi, mi ngā karangataha maha o ngā hawe wha, kua haro mai nei pāna tēnei kaupapa. It's a real pleasure to join this event, and I'm grateful to both the fabulous organisers and the various provocateurs contributing to this webinar. And before I answer the question, the hard questions that I've been asked to engage with, I want to honour the legacy of Sir Paul Callaghan, which brings us together for this event. Sir Paul Callaghan was a remarkable academic, but even more powerful as a provocateur about what we value as a nation. So it's a real pleasure to join an event which honours his considerable legacy to our nation. The question that I've been asked to engage with is about whether our theory of change or the type of interventions that we might consider in response to grand challenges would change if we took a treaty of Waitangi approach, or were in some way iwi-centric to our thinking. And I think there are 2 answers to that. The first is whether we're approaching that from a treaty partnership lens, or whether we're approaching that from working in a Māori way on the particular issue of the day. Because I think most of our experience of when we try to do things under a treaty partnership umbrella is that we spend a long time looking deeply at the values that guide action and guide decision making. So that the partnership approach, what it seems to do primarily is create new frames of reference or new mental models for approaching an issue. And I think that's deeply valuable, because the values and the mindsets that have led us to where we are unlikely or unable to transition us into the futures that we might want. So that partnership approach, by introducing different values, can be a really powerful way to step into a new way of thinking. I think there's also a second approach about whether we approach things in a Māori way of doing things, because there are two principles that seem to characterise the Māori way of doing things from my observations and experiences. The first is that there is a real privileging of ground up solution building. And I think that one of the things that's misunderstood widely about Māori communities is we're seen as highly hierarchical with a top-down approach, which is the projection of Western notions of power, because within Māori communities, power goes ground up. So relying on ground up community level solutions is consistent with the way that our communities operate from core precepts. And then the second thing that I think is a Māori style of doing things is that we've got a real pattern of creating change through kind of stealth mechanisms. We've got lots of stories about a kaimātua in a particular community who will pick a young person to do a particular job. And the kaimātua in that context is thinking about 3 steps ahead of what that role will mean for the person that they're creating an opportunity for. What the young person sees as the immediate opportunity, what the kaimātua sees is what that leads to. Whether it's about creating a role connected to marae community that gives that young person a sense of belonging and connectivity, and therefore confidence and aspiration in their personal identity. So that I think the Māori style of doing things characterises that not having a straight line approach, to enabling there to be organic and serendipitous approaches to creating change and transformation within our communities. So I think that Māori approaches to social change are a fabulous reservoir of precedents for how we might approach social transformation differently. I really value this opportunity to contribute to the dialogue, and I look forward to joining you for the Q&A session later. Nā reira, tēnā rā koutou.
Just any opportunity to spend some time with her. She's an incredibly deep thinker and a great fun person to be with. I'm going to pass over to Jamie now. Hopefully you can join us. Great, thanks.
Kia ora tātou. I've had some tough acts to follow in my time, but I think this probably takes the cake. It's tough acts, to the power of 6. And I like how Wendy set me up as the one who's going to try and pull this in together to something coherent. I can't make that promise, but I'm going to say a bunch of stuff, and hopefully I finish saying it within the time frame. So I'll set myself a little timer here. So it is a tough act to follow, and it's a privilege to be amongst to be taking up many people's time and to be amongst this great list of speakers. I'll want to pick up on a few things that some other people have said. I want to start with Sam's points around the technological changes that we've seen over the last 10 years. And it's amazing when you take a point in time like that, when you think about all those changes. But what was occurred to me is we're thinking about the amazing new value that's been created in that time, and the increases in quality of life that has occurred over that time because of those innovations. And yet, and we've achieved other great things as well in terms of massive reductions in global poverty, etc. But despite all that, we are still, or perhaps even more so, operating outside the boundaries of our planet in terms of what it can absorb. Our society is less equal, and I'm sitting in a university here, and the generation that are walking through this hall and the halls of universities in developed Western economies around the world are the first generation that'll be worse off than their parents. So we've got an amazing capacity to innovate to solve problems, but more of the same isn't going to solve the grand challenges that are sort of bringing us together in this forum today. So it's can't just be more of the same and faster, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's why I love Rowan and Mariana's idea that innovation is political. And I'm an innovation entrepreneurship guy, and so that's the focus that I'll take today. And if that kind of awareness of what's happening with this generation and the timescale we've got to operate within in terms of climate change, if that doesn't compel us to tilt the playing field a little bit, then nothing will. So if innovation isn't political yet, well, innovation already is political, because we do need to tilt that playing field. And I love this idea of a mission, yeah, and being that bold, and think of it in terms of moonshots, because the institutional gravity of the status quo is so powerful, more powerful than the gravity that held us to the planet. And we need to get used to the idea that the institutional change that's required to meet these grand challenges is going to be really uncomfortable. We want this to be, well, we'll innovate our way out of it. Yeah, we will, but we need to politicize that innovation in a hurry. And the institutional change that's going to be required to deliver us a sustainable and inclusive economy is going to be uncomfortable for those who are benefiting from the status quo. So these are big challenges, and globally. But I think in New Zealand, and this is picking up on Sacha's point, that we've got an opportunity. The treaty is not just an obligation; it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity because it gives us a legal and moral basis for bold and transformative action. Because that's the promise of the treaty, right? Is to ensure a good life for the people of this land to the best of our ability. So it's not like, okay, let's get together and talk about it. It's a foundation of this country. And that if we can't use that as we need to use that as a platform for our action. And we've said things like having a well-being economy, and that's the scale and the level that we need to operate at. But we need to use, in my opinion, the central tools of government to actually change how the economy works to deliver on those. Because if not, and this is, I'm speaking as a researcher, but also as a practitioner in entrepreneurship and investment space, if we don't use those central tools, then the entrepreneurs that will take us, or are trying to take us to a more sustainable and inclusive economy, are not only pushing against the status quo in markets, but against the status quo is being supported by the tools of government in terms of how we do economic development, which seems like a pretty perverse kind of situation. So that's my meandering kind of thoughts. There's a few kind of ideas to finish on in terms of things that we can do, and these aren't at mission level, but they're sort of front of mind. I think we need to give our entrepreneurial ecosystem a purpose. It's like I said, we can't, more of the same but faster isn't going to cut it. The new generation of entrepreneurs that are walking through these halls are already aligning their entrepreneurship and their innovation with what they find meaningful and with their purpose. So they're already there. And we've got really good at understanding what an entrepreneurial ecosystem is. We're getting better at making it more inclusive, and so who's participating in it, but we've seemed to have forgotten about why. We know entrepreneurial ecosystems are really important in terms of driving economic development, but to what kind of development? And so more of the same is going to deliver us more of the same. So we need new models of business models and different technologies, but we need new models at the macro level as well. And I'm going to wrap up, Wendy, because I know I'm going to be making you twitchy any second now. So tilt our entrepreneurial ecosystem to what kind of entrepreneurship do we want to be fostering? What kind of high growth firms do we want to see growing beyond just sectors and particular technologies, to pick up on Sir Paul's point. We need to create an impact investing market, and this is my research, but I've got skin in the game, got organs in the game at this point in impact investing. So we need, when I talk about the central tools of government, we do this with venture capitals already with New Zealand Growth Capital Partners. It sort of boggles the mind at the moment that we are deploying capital to support the growth of firms, but we're pretty agnostic about what kind of value beyond the economic that they deliver. And what I mean by that is perhaps we should also be prioritizing the firms that are explicitly trying to address social and environmental issues directly with their business models, not with externalities and spillover effects and being incidental, which is the standard economic model. So moral of that story is show us the wholesale money for impact investing in the venture space in New Zealand. Because I think we all generally agree that new ventures are one of the key engines of change. So we need to give it a direction, not just a rate to plagiarize Rowan and Mariana's great work. And if we're going to do stimulus post-COVID, surely there's a great opportunity there to get stimulus with a purpose that takes us to build back better and that kind of thing. And then we need to really take a crack at our some of our core conceptions of institutional conceptions of what the purpose of a company is, and our notions of shareholder primacy, which are used as a shield in many respects to doing what is known to be right in terms of fiduciary responsibilities, etc. And we should be considering more things like impact-weighted accounts and true cost accounting, etc. We've proven that we can innovate in terms of how we use legal conceptions like the company and giving personhood to rivers and other natural features. So that's a far more malleable innovation than we are currently realizing and utilizing. I've gone over time. I'm going to shut up. Thanks, Mandy.
Jamie, we had a lovely chat yesterday too about that last point, and for anyone that knows me, revisiting the roles and responsibilities of companies is something I'm very passionate about. So I have to also add a great sort of summary of where we are today. So thank you very much. I knew you'd pull it off. Amazing. Right. Now we've got, I think of these two ladies as change makers, and the positions and the organisations that they're in are extraordinary. So over to you, Donna.
Kia ora koutou. So thanks, Wendy. Before I start, I would really like to thank the McGuinness Institute and Callaghan Innovation for giving me this opportunity to be part of the conversation 10 years on from Sir Paul's speech. So as Wendy mentioned, I'm Donna Purdue. I'm the Chief Economist at MB. And for those of you that don't know me, I've spent most of my career in the private sector. So I was a bank economist for 15 years. And in 2015, I made the transition to public sector, and I worked for Treasury for a year before coming into MB to be the chief economist. And for those of you that have made the transition from private to public sector, it is quite a culture shock. So from what we've heard from different people today, lots of fantastic speakers, lots of really interesting ideas and approaches for mapping our future. What I'm going to give you is my perspective on basically coming from the private sector into the public sector around how the policy environment is changing, and how I think it needs to change if government is really going to be walking the talk, if you like, in terms of a wellbeing economy and the transition that we're looking for in the future. The views I'm going to talk to are mine, not necessarily shared by MB. So I think in the last few years, there's clearly been a shift in what New Zealanders deem important. And I think that's best illustrated by the change in government that we had in 2017, where I think voters unsatisfied with how we were dealing with some of the big challenges such as inequality and climate change. They voted in a new government. They voted with their feet, and again, what we saw last year with a majority government being voted in. And I think for policymakers, that shift is being reflected in a transition of our core economic objective. So we've gone from an objective largely being focused around efficiency for the last 20 or 30 years to one that's now focused on well-being. And we've got an economic strategy that is not just focused on delivering more GDP growth, but it's focused on building a more productive, sustainable, inclusive economy. What's been really interesting for me is that, and as Mariana Mazzucato would talk about, that's quite a fundamental shift, because you're no longer talking about, from a policy perspective, just achieving a rate of growth. You're actually talking about achieving a type of growth. So we were saying when that strategy was established in 2017, we no longer wanted growth that was at the expense of the environment or our communities. But within what we've seen within a lot of the policy sort of environments is that we're still focused on existing policy tools. So, we haven't really adjusted the policy toolkit for the shift in the economic objective. And, you know, as we've heard from previous speakers, that's, you know, it's going to be pretty difficult to achieve what we want to achieve with using BAU policy tools. And clearly I'm not alone in this view. And as Rowan talked about earlier today, I think Mariana Mazzucato's work has been really instrumental in bringing new ideas, new approaches in the field of economics to the table. And she's really influenced a lot of my thinking and the work that I've done over the last 4 years, but so have other economists. So the likes of Kate Rayworth, Mark Carney, Jeremy Rifkin, Joseph Stiglitz, Michael Porter, just to name a few. And of course, there's the work that's going on in some of our big economic agencies like the OECD, IMF, World Economic Forum, that are really promoting new ways of thinking and new approaches for economic policy. I think importantly, these economic leaders, or thought leaders, as I call them, they're really challenging long-held economic and policy assumptions about the role of the individual, the role of the state, and the role of business. So it's making us think about if we're more than just, you know, self-interested and rational beings, if value creation isn't just the role of the private sector, and if what's good for society is good for business and not the reverse, you know, what does that actually mean for policy? What does it mean for the decision making that we're undertaking and the processes that we follow? So, and one of the other things around this, you know, emergent thinking, and I guess I try not to use the word new because some of it's been around for quite a long time, but it's just not mainstream. But I think it's much more reflective of the complex system that we're operating in now. And, you know, it's encouraging the public sector to work in new and collaborative ways where the focus is not on a singular output or it's not on singular issues or sectors, but where we're looking to deliver outcomes and find solutions to those big societal challenges by working across the system and in partnership. So we're looking for those win-wins or those co-benefits. And I think this new thinking really, you know, allows us to do that in a much more effective way than the current policy tools that we tend to use. So I think the need for government to be innovating and collaborating differently so we can achieve well-being and a better future is definitely a strong part of the recent Public Service Act reforms. But I do think a lot of the new thinking that I've just been talking about still is on the periphery of a lot of our core government agencies, and our core economic levers are still geared to drive efficiency. So we're still geared to that efficiency objective rather than well-being. And, you know, we'll see that in our productivity drivers where it's, you know, we're still innovation, skills, investment, and kind of in their silos. And we're all about fixing market failures still. So just to sum up, you know, what does it all mean? I guess for me, over the next, and certainly in my role, over the next 10 years, for government to really play its part in mapping the future for the New Zealanders and the future that New Zealanders want, then our institutions, and this is going back to what Jamie was saying just before, our institutions and policy frameworks, how we govern ourselves and to what purpose, will need to be reconfigured. We need to allow for much more diverse perspectives and alternate worldviews, particularly those of Māori and Pacifica, as well as greater partnership and self-determination in order to truly move us towards that wellbeing objective and to grow wellbeing. So on that note, I welcome the conversation today. I'm really pleased to be a part of it, and I look forward to working with others in partnership in the future.
Cool. And thank you, Donna. And Donna, I think when I've been talking to people, I've been saying, oh, you know, when did you first come across Mariana's work? And Donna was the first so far in answering that question. So well done, Donna, for being aware and looking out and exploring these new ideas. So thank you. Right, Vic, the finale.
Kia ora koutou e hoa. As Wendy said, today is an important date as it marks 10 years since our namesake gave the speech that led to the inception of Callaghan Innovation. We're delighted to collaborate with the McGuinness Institute today on this public webinar. So in late 2019, we undertook a piece of research to determine how far we'd come towards achieving the conditions required for New Zealand to truly become the place where talent wants to live. And we took the data that Sir Paul had based his presentation on, and we updated it with the latest figures. And we were naturally disheartened to find that the country had in fact gone backwards on many of the statistics that he'd used, including environmental and social outcomes, as well as ones involving productivity and economics. So Callaghan Innovation was going to start a public discussion about these challenges and the intent to spark a korero along with collaboration and co-creation on the actions that needed to be taken. But then COVID happened. And you all know that the pandemic changed everything, but it changed one important thing in particular. Suddenly, we were actually closer to achieving Sir Paul's dream than ever before, because overnight, one of our least productive industries ceased to exist, and the impact was brutal. So tourism has boomed over the last decade, but it's remained a sector where the productivity of each individual employed was only about a third of where we wanted and needed it to be, a benchmark set by the likes of the international tech businesses like Apple or Samsung, and of course our own Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, Xero, or Rocket Lab. I feel very privileged to be supporting these and many other innovators and entrepreneurs, and I think Alex articulated brilliantly the challenges that many of them face, that we must work together to solve, that they cannot do it on their own. The last 12 months has also been a once-in-a-lifetime challenge, but at Callaghan Innovation, we see it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really shift the dial. We intend to double down on business as usual, but better. So Paul always had a way with words, so I'm going to let him explain. He said, what is needed is a national strategy and the resolve to move consciously towards its vision. A national strategy requires not just a vision, but a shared one, and the understanding and participation of at least all of government, if not every private and public sector organisation, every iwi and community group, every individual in New Zealand aged 8 to 80. And this is another job we see for our team of 5 million. COVID proved that the team of 5 million has real power in tackling global and local challenges. New Zealand has the opportunity to be the place where talent wants to live. New Zealand is trusted. We're #1 in the world for low corruption. We're #2 as the safest country in the world. We're #9 as the happiest. Our government is trusted. 83% of New Zealanders trust the government to deal with national problems. 88% trust them to make the right decisions around COVID. And Callaghan Innovation itself is the 5th most trusted organisation in government and the 2nd most trusted for leadership. I'm a big supporter of the principles behind missions to bring the best talent right across the country and globally to collaborate, co-create, and align behind our biggest challenges as a country is a very powerful way we will solve some of our systemic issues that we have faced for decades, as well as significant new challenges coming our way. I see the concept of missions as similar to rarana, which is the need to weave our collective ambition, experience, skills and assets together to solve these challenges. The change that is required is so significant and systematic, it needs all of us. We'll need government policy, and Donna referred to that. We need regulatory and legislative change. We need government departments and agencies to work together in new ways and in new ways with the private sector. We need new skills and talents, so our education system and immigration is key. We need changes in our industry bodies. We need changes in our supply chains, just look at the building sector. And we need the assets and capabilities in the private sector, us more. We think there is no better time than now, as we have many more challenges coming our way. So if you look ahead over the next 15 years, let me just give you a flavour. Our population aged over 65 is going to double. Our life expectancy increases by 5 years, putting immense stress on our superannuation and health systems. We know around half of job activities will be automated. And thank goodness, because while our retiring population is doubling, our increase in our workforce population is only 10%. Half of the workforce will be Māori, Pacific and Asian. And I ask myself, how are we preparing our Māori and Pacifica populations for the future high-tech jobs rather than the jobs that will be automated through the next decade. We've estimated around 1.7 million climate refugees in the Pacific alone. They're looking for new homes. And to Sam's point, the top 30 economic entities in the world, more than 20 of them will be corporations, not countries. And so our global technology and commerce will demand a rethink of our national and international structures, norms and behaviours. And we've seen just the start of this and how it will play out with the recent interplay between Facebook and the Australian government. I implore all of you, presenters or participants in this session, to manaakitanga, to start walking the talk on our need to genuinely collaborate, co-create, and put aside our individual desired outcomes and egos in the need to solve the bigger challenges we face. At Callaghan Innovation, we remain inspired and motivated by Sir Paul's thinking. We've recently reviewed our vision. We ran workshops with over 200 of our people, and they chose to adopt Sir Paul's vision as a place where talent wants to live. And Catherine spoke incredibly eloquently about the meaning behind that. We want to plant trees for our mokapuna's mokapuna. So what is in it for us? Not just at Callaghan Innovation, but everyone on this call today. In becoming Paul's so-called resolve, I believe that that is what he intended for us. So please join me in a toast, ladies and gentlemen, to Sir Paul Callaghan. And back to you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Vic. While I've been listening to you, I've also been getting texts from TY, who's got 3 questions that he would love to give. He's going to start by giving one to Catherine, then Rowan, and then Sacha. So that's going to be sort of the order of the questions, and then we'll add some more. I'm hoping Julian Andrews will either pass a question to me or vice versa. We'll work that out. But what a terrific lineup, I have to say, and I'm definitely going to be watching this again and hopefully writing these notes up. Can I say welcome, Sacha? Great to have you on the panel with us as well. Right, okay, TY, where are you? Come on in and let's get these questions rolling.
Sure thing, Wendy, I'm right here.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll start with you, Catherine. Wonderful, wonderful speech. Paul was an incredible storyteller. That is more than evident, and we're going to be finding out about that very soon as well. The first question is, was he always like this? And the second has a bit more meat to it. Is storytelling an effective mode of calling people to action?
Yeah. Well, in answer to your first question, Dad was always a storyteller. And, you know, it was an incredible experience being his child, because the experience of growing up with this man, and we'd sit around the dinner table every night and we'd talk, and he would tell stories, and they would range from stories of his childhood to stories of his ancestors when they arrived in New Zealand, but they were also stories about what was going on in the world and world history, and what was happening in other countries and why, and what could we do about it. And it was an amazing experience. So he definitely was a storyteller. I think storytelling is very powerful. And if New Zealand is going to go in a different direction, then I think part of what Dad was trying to say is you've got to think about the stories that we've told ourselves for the last 20 or 50 years and think about, are they the kind of stories that are going to get us to the place where we want to be in the future? And if they're not, we need to start thinking about what new stories can we tell. You know, I think he just wanted us to look at ourselves in a new way and say, we're not just people who are good with a bit of number 8 wire. We're people who are creative and intelligent and who can foot it with the best on the world stage. And I think that's really what he wanted us to think about ourselves. So I hope that answers your question, TY.
Absolutely does. Thank you, Catherine. Now, Rowan, I've got 2 for you and I can't decide which I want to choose, but I'll start with this one. You discussed systemic opportunities. I was wondering whether systemic challenges and systemic opportunities are the same thing. If they aren't, why? If they are, why?
Wow, that's a profound question. I think that challenges present opportunities, and as Wendy outlined in the quote that she read right at the beginning of this event, the pandemic, for example, has created huge opportunities, and potentially systemic challenges are a kind of window through which we can access our ingenuity. But I think that opportunities, I don't think all challenges turn into opportunities, and that's part of the reason why you need directionality. You need to the purpose to actually take on the challenges is when the opportunities arise. And sometimes until you start breaking them down into more manageable or practical entry points, they can seem quite abstract or existential, these crises. If you look at our pandemic response, in many instances, they've been different all over the world, but they've been broken down into, how do we manage contact tracing? How do we manage vaccinations? How do we manage how we approach travel? And it's an iterative way of identifying all of the opportunities within what is a very large and emergent systemic crisis. We don't 100% know where it's going, but the opportunities have been taken along the way, some well done and some done more poorly. While you're not able to actually travel outside your country, I'm not able to travel outside my bedroom. So, this is how these systemic challenges are different around the world. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think they are opportunities when they are taken on board.
TY, are you there? We might have lost him. Okay.
I believe I'm back.
Oh, good. Yay. Come on back.
Excellent.
Sacha.
Bear with me all. All right. Next we have is Sacha. Sorry, I didn't get the very end of that, Rowan. But I agreed with everything I heard. So, Sacha, the Māori economy has grown to just under $69 billion in assets this year. But perhaps assets aren't the best measure of well-being. One could argue that impact is. The question that I have isn't directly related, but here we go. Where do you see the opportunities for the Māori economy, for where it is now to where it could be in 10 years?
Kia ora koutou. It's fabulous that the questions are really tricky. So I think for the Māori economy, there's a couple of principles that we need to acknowledge first up. And the most important one is, what's the definition of an economy? Because what we're using at the moment are entities that are majority owned by Māori. And that's an sector within our economy, but it's not necessarily an economy proper. Because as we know, economies have institutions in the form of shared norms and give effect to that in their economic endeavour. So I think the most important challenge for the Māori economy over the next decade is genuinely becoming an economy. Because at the moment we've got a performance gap that we quite often don't talk about in polite company, between our rhetoric and what we do, because our entities have predominantly adopted a Western model of corporate governance and are still journeying through the different approaches to values-based innovation and economic endeavour. We've definitely got some leading lights that are genuinely doing their enterprise from the basis of tradition-based values. But equally, we've got entities that are still stepping into the courageous zone of being values-led. So if we look at Ngāi Tahu, for example, because that's the one I've got the ability to talk about without stepping on anyone's toes. If Ngāi Tahu buying GoBus was about purchasing predominantly on simple economic metrics, an entity with an adequate ROI for our distribution purposes. It wasn't about what's the kind of asset that is aligned to our deep social and cultural values and aspirations as a community. And I think in lots of ways that the ability for Māori entities to step into genuine values-based innovation will be a litmus test for New Zealand, because we've had 20 years for Ngāi Tahu to be wealthy. Before that, we had 7 generations of dire impoverishment. And the first challenge on receiving settlement is don't stuff it up. Ensure that you do things so that that economic inheritance exists more ake tonu in perpetuity. So it's fair for a period to be quite conservative in how we approach our businesses. But increasingly, the patience is running out within our communities about values-based alignment. So I think while New Zealand has a general societal push to transform our economy, to live within planetary boundaries or contribute to more social and environmental positive outcomes, there's a general push in New Zealand, but I think there's about to be a crisis of legitimacy within the Māori economy that will accelerate that, and that will accelerate experimentation, which is more broadly valuable as a precedent for other sectors.
That was excellent. Thank you, Sacha. Agreed. Over to you, Wendy.
Okay, well, I'm now going to ask in order of Donna, then Sam, then Alex. I'm hoping you're still there, Alex. I know he had to race at some stage, but so this one is, if you had one use of a magic wand, what single lever would you choose to push, pull for Aotearoa? So that goes in order of Donna, then Sam, then Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So this is with my MB hat on, I guess, the environment that I'm working in. I'd have to say it'd be government procurement. I think we've got huge opportunity through our supply chains and networks to really influence how we do things differently, and the better outcomes or broader outcomes framework that's been introduced and the new rules around that really give us an opportunity to lean quite heavily into that space and drive change. And I actually have to head off, sorry, but I really wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been fantastic listening to everybody and their views. There's so much enthusiasm and I think momentum and excitement around opportunities for New Zealand, and I'm really keen to stay a part of the conversation, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, for joining us. Cheers. Thank you. Sam. Magic wand.
Yeah, so I sort of just obviously haven't really prepared anything, but I think the thing which, you know, I sort of think about the innovation that happens in the private sector and how you really influence that. You know, and to me, it's not having a whole bunch of, you know, meetings with government people and trying to share ideas or any of that sort of stuff. To me, you know, I'm reasonably kind of classical in my thinking, and that I sort of think you set the policy frameworks and then the innovation will happen. And to me, the big thing in New Zealand, I think, which is, you know, obvious, is our taxation system. And so, you know, we've just seen tax increases in New Zealand, which has increased, you know, increase the tax on kind of what I kind of think of as, you know, middle income kind of people earning their, you know, salaries, and that goes up, you know, that goes up a few cents now. But we really haven't done anything in the tax system which has reorientated people away from housing, away from taking on too much debt, away from investing in land, away from banks, you know, only lending for, you know, people to buy residential property. All of these things are quite problematic. You know, there's no capital gains tax in New Zealand, so we just sold this. You know, a whole bunch of wealthy people invested in this company. Alex went and built it, and then you know, Alex gets staff options. We have shares. We have no tax on that, so we get totally tax-free gains on that. You know, hundreds of millions of dollars, and Alex pays 39% marginal tax on everything that he gets out of the staff option schemes. And then where does he put his money? Interest rates are zero. You know, clearly he should be going and, you know, buying houses, is kind of how he's naturally incentivized. So I sort of think that, you know, if you have a magic wand, you've really got to reorientate us with the tax system to the productive economy, and away from, you know, people getting capital gains tax of 10, 15, 20% isn't going to stop people investing in, you know, technology companies or any of that sort of stuff. That's a nonsense. So yeah, I sort of feel our tax system is probably one of the largest impediments that we have in order to actually unleashing the innovation and getting the capital going where it needs to go, all those sorts of things. And obviously paying for the things you want to pay for in terms of schools and hospitals and all those sorts of good things.
Excellent answer, Sam. Thank you very much. Cool. Alex, what's your magic wand stuff?
Since Sam just used his magic wand to solve my tax problems, which I very much appreciate, I don't think anyone's feeling sorry for me at this point, though. I actually agree with a lot of what Sam said, but I'm going to be much more direct. House prices need to go down, and the reason I focus on that is because for me, first of all, it's about social mobility. In my mind, this is the biggest barrier to social mobility. It's compounding inequality over time and entrenching a society of social classes, which is really like, that's not what New Zealand is about. You know, that people came to New Zealand because it was a new country and there was the opportunity for to create something. And to me, we're entrenching those issues. And you know, I just want to comment. I think Vic mentioned, you know, what are we doing for Māori and Pacific, and also commented on us all putting aside our personal interests. And you know, I live in Auckland right now, and although I'm actually coming to you from Christchurch, and my observation is that you know, Auckland is increasingly a segregated city. It's not a popular thing to say. But the number of Aucklanders who I speak to, and you know, middle class Aucklanders who have never been to the Aotearoa markets, the number of Pacific people who I speak to, who's, you know, kids who have never been to the city, you know, it's really quite distressing. And you know, we talk about these things, and then essentially middle-class Aucklanders go home and they look at how they can leverage their equity in their expensive house into a more expensive house, or even more into a beach house in Mangawhai. And those things are all compounding the problems we have. So I think there are many challenges in this country, but in my mind, house prices are the most obvious one and most direct lever that we can push.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Now we've also got some quite detailed Q&A questions, and they are actually very good, and I might take them offline and pass those on to you all momentarily. TY, are you back with us? This is the question.
You tell me, am I?
You are, woohoo.
Oh, great.
Okay. I wondered if you'd like to put a question to Jamie and Vic.
Sure, I'll start with Jamie.
Okay, we're going to just bear with this for a moment because he does come back, hopefully.
I like this question that I just get to say whatever I want.
Well, I think that could be something that we could do. I mean, you can do the magic wand one. And what do you think? Want to have a go at that one? Or I know you sort of covered a bit of magic wand stuff at the end of your talk, so I wanted to give you an original one. Yeah, well, let's see if Tawai, who by the way is one of the entrepreneurs that I was referring to that's come out of this institution, who, I mean, the point that I was making about entrepreneur ecosystems while we wait for Tawai is that, Sir Paul talked about 100 entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs are actors, but they're agents, but they act within a structure.
and governments can shape that structure. They can shape and make those markets, which is really the gist of the point that I was making. And so we can't just let 1,000 flowers bloom. We need to think way more intentionally about the structures that we create for those entrepreneurs. I'm really glad that Sam, when he took the magic wand, he went to the really hard stuff of, what we tax, because I probably would have played around with something a little bit more achievable and around entrepreneurial ecosystems and that kind of thing. Maybe I'll just make a point that I think if we could wave a magic wand and we applied it to what Sacha was talking about with the Māori economy, then perhaps we would actually think more broadly about value, because that's really bloody hard. So you do need a magic wand for that, to think more what kind of value that we are creating and for whom, because so much flows from that. And the reason why that connects so well to the Māori economy or Indigenous enterprise generally is the separation of societal well-being and commerce was never truly separated. And that separation is part of the things that's created the grand challenges that we now need to try and solve. And if we just keep going back to the tools that created the problem, well, we're not going to get all that satisfying results. So that's not really a cogent answer, but I said some stuff and filled a gap while waiting for Tawai.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? Do you have a sense that we're moving back to normal very quickly? Are you feeling, because that's what I'm sensing the last 6 or 8 weeks. It's a little bit like there's just a gravitas to move back to the, to what we had before, and we're losing this opportunity, I feel, very quickly. Is that your observation?
It's certainly my feeling. So perhaps it wasn't disruptive enough for enough of the right kinds of people who would drive the change and wield the influence. And so it's almost a paradox in the sense that we have got a K-shaped recovery, and it's been really the disparities have been amplified, but our economy, we've managed it so well. Our economy has done so much better than we anticipated. That it hasn't disrupted some things in the way that we anticipated. So we've been able to get back to something more normal more quickly than we anticipated. So perhaps we've missed, the opportunity of a crisis to some extent. But we've got people on this call, and certainly the intent is there that COVID or not, status quo is not tenable. So I hope we're wrong, Wendy, but that's certainly the vibe anyway.
Okay, so I'm going to, Tiwai still hasn't been able to get back to us. So what we're going to do is move to Vic. And Vic, I think Jamie and the rest of the team here are really interested in what you think next needs to be done to use this opportunity or this door that's closing as we speak.
Yeah, I think I do want to follow up on Jamie's point around are we too comfortable? Are we not feeling this pain enough? And the concern that I have, along with we're a bit too comfortable on this, is our lack of resilience. So the upside of being in New Zealand is that we've got a relatively normal life. The downside is that the rest of the world are doing it really hard, and the resilience they're building from that is very strong. So there's all sorts of dynamics at play here that are going to be really interesting. I think the only other thing I want to add, because I talked a lot about in my session around how I would kind of like to see things go, is to pick up again on a point that Jamie alluded to, and picking up on Sam's point, which is we need to, in terms of supporting our entrepreneurs more, where I see a massive gap, and we see this in Māori as well, is in procurement. So our biggest parts of our economy, which is the government and our corporates, are not procuring innovative entrepreneurial services, and they're not procuring for diversity. And so that would probably be one of my biggest requests, actually, is if you're in a Spark or an MB or a Callaghan Innovation, where you have, relatively good secure of cash in terms of, ability to fund, that you are looking at far more innovative solutions. So looking to our entrepreneurs. And that not only just helps them get off the ground, but what it helps is the diffusion of the incredible innovation in our startup sector into 2/3 of the biggest part of our economy. And so the Productivity Commission are doing some work on the frontier firms. and looking at the diffusion of technology and innovation. And that's a really big problem for us to solve. So that would be my one other request to those people on the line, in regards to work with your procurement teams and shift that. If you shift that, you're going to start to shift the innovation appetite and the appetite for diversity in your organisations.
Thank you very much, Vic. Right, that sort of actually brings the session to a close. Oh, TY, you're back. Any last word of wisdom? You're on mute at the moment, so if you go off mute and you can just with me jointly thank everybody. Would you like to say a last word and then I'll close?
Sure thing. It's hard to put into words the inspiration that has come.
Well, we are just going to leave it there. TY is a wonderful, energized young man that will definitely learn and take this forward. So looking forward to seeing him once he arrives back down in Wellington. Now look, so where we are right now, had some fantastic ideas and conversations. I'm completely delighted. We will actually get this up on YouTube. We will try and write up the comments and observations. We will try and deal with some of those additional questions, and they're great, by the way, that have come in. They are long and intense and would require a much deeper conversation. And so we'll try and grab all that, put it together in something by the end of April. I want to completely thank, giving your time at the moment is the biggest gift, and I want to thank all the speakers incredibly sincerely. Catherine, your father was super amazing, shaped my life and a lot of other people's, and how I put my energy and time and effort, and I can't thank him or you enough, and for everyone else being here, including the wonderful audience. Let's be a tribe. Let's go out and make this happen. Thank you very much.